A pivotal decision by Norway's Borgarting Court of Appeal on March 14, 2025, restored Jehovah's Witnesses' legal registration and state funding, overturning a lower court's ruling that had stripped them of these rights over concerns about their practice of shunning. The appeal judges unanimously concluded that, although disfellowshipping can fracture families and cause distress among young members, it did not amount to undue pressure or illegal psychological violence under Norwegian law. They noted that any member may freely withdraw simply by submitting a written notice, making the resulting social fallout voluntary rather than state-sanctioned coercion. But this decision was full of doubts. Barely 6 weeks later, on April 24, 2025, the Norwegian government filed an appeal with the Supreme Court, arguing that the appellate court's decision violated constitutional protections for religious freedom under both national statutes and the European Convention on Human Rights. The Supreme Court's Appeals Selection Committee must first decide whether the case raises questions of sufficient public importance to warrant a full hearing, a process expected to take several months. At the heart of this dispute lies a fundamental tension between safeguarding the autonomy of religious communities and protecting vulnerable individuals, especially children, from the harm of enforced social exclusion. In early 2024, the Oslo District Court had upheld the government's decision to revoke Jehovah's Witnesses' registration and subsidies, finding that their shunning policies constituted psychological violence against minors and breached national child protection laws. Critics of the appeal court's reversal argue that this legal interpretation downplays the lived reality of those subjected to shunning. Accounts from former members describe deep depression, anxiety, and lasting trauma from being cut off by close relatives. Human rights observers contend that even brief episodes of enforced isolation can inflict long-term damage and call for stricter oversight of high-control religious groups. International reaction has been mixed. Some defenders of religious liberty warn that penalizing faith communities for their internal disciplinary measures risks setting a precedent that could erode freedom of conscience. Conversely, child rights advocates lament what they see as a setback for Norway's obligations under international conventions, arguing that psychological harm need not be physically prolonged to constitute abuse. If the Supreme Court admits the appeal, a full hearing could take place by late 2025, with a final judgment expected in early 2026. That ruling will determine the extent to which the state may lawfully regulate the internal practices of religious organizations when those practices conflict with broader human rights principles. Regardless of the outcome, this case is poised to set a landmark precedent on the balance between religious autonomy and the state's duty to protect its most vulnerable citizens. Jehovah's Witnesses' rules around disfellowshipping and shunning directly undermine basic personal freedoms. The freedom to associate with whom you choose, the right to family life, and the fundamental right to bodily integrity when medical choices, like refusing blood transfusions, are overridden. Their tight control over information and discouragement of independent thought violate the right to freedom of conscience, while mandatory reporting and silence around internal abuse can infringe on the right to safety and protection from psychological harm. In sum, these policies strip individuals of autonomy, dignity, and the support networks that all people depend on.